I think CRRC as a whole has brought a lot of strength and credibility to the governmental agencies that we all deal with, and it's done a lot over the years.
In 1953, the State Transportation Tax Administrator said that people in the refuse collection business were engaged in the business of transportation. There was a law on the books in California that assessed a 3% per month gross receipts tax. You had an income of $10,000 a month, you owed $300 in taxes. One of the icons of the industry, Louis Visco, came to my office and we talked about it, and actually was authorized to go to Sacramento to talk to the state tax administrator to try to talk him out of his interpretation, citing some legal theory and some actual appellate court decisions. He stood steadfast, so the only choice we had then was to clarify the law so that the industry would not be classified as being in the transportation business, but more in the solid waste management, collection, and disposal business. Louis and I went to Sacramento together, spent several days there. Southern California had a coordinating council of some local associations. They're the ones who authorized this. But Louis was the one who financed the trip and hired a political consultant named Hazel Junkins, who knew her way around Sacramento. And the short story is that we made the rounds, talked to a lot of people, supported legislation that was introduced by members of the state legislature that in essence said that we were not part of the transportation industry because that was only an incidental part. We didn't get our bill passed in 1953, but we did return in 1955, and we were successful. So the law was clarified that those in the solid waste management industry, in the collection and disposal business, were not subject to the 3% gross receipts tax, which literally, if it were applied, would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, let alone millions. So it was a big move. Because of that Sacramento experience, and because Assemblyman by the name of Bill Marsh said, how about next year, what do you want? Don't you have a state organization? And I said, no, we just had a local Los Angeles County group of associations. And it became apparent to me that the industry needed to have a statewide organization that would represent the interests of the refuse collection industry in Sacramento, and that it was important enough to do that. As we know, Northern and Southern California have different demographics, particularly in the waste industry, and therefore the people in Northern California, maybe in Southern California, did not think that we needed a trade association statewide. If we had a problem, we could always go to Sacramento. And I suggested that the better way was to establish an organization, get acquainted, support your local state legislator, be it senator or assemblyman, and grow from the grassroots of following and support so that if you needed something, you could go to Sacramento and you were well recognized. Bill O'Hannison at that time was the president of the local association and also president of what we call the coordinating council. He and Marshall Rabens, to some degree Adam Schleining, we talked about this, and contact was made with people in Northern California. And the one that comes to my mind, first of all, was Dewey Vittori.
But I'd say probably the driving force originally in the Bay Area was Oakland Scavengers were the major players as far as the CRRC was concerned. We met in Oakland. Dewey Vittori, which was the vice president of Oakland Scavengers. I always thought he was the president, but when he died, he was the vice president, and I never knew who the president was. But he was very social. He knew everybody and everything. And for me as a mentor, I thought the world of that guy. He really, you call him up, he'd tell you anything you wanted to know.
My father passed away in 1998, and he was involved at the very beginning of CRRC. One of his best friends, I believe, was the CRRC's first president, Dewey Vittori. And Dewey and my father were very, very close, and those were in the early days of the formation of CRRC.
I met my first meeting with Marshall Rabins and O'Hannison, and I just sat and listened, and pretty soon Dewey Vittori had foresight, and he said, let's us hold some meetings. And the first meetings was very social. The ones that could afford it or get away because they owned the company, whatever, it'd be 13, 14, 15, maybe at the most, couple of vendors. Tremendous meals, tremendous parties. O'Hannison threw the first one in LA in a parking lot of a big hotel.
Benny Anselmo, a senior again, is dominant, comes up all the time, is very prominent. He with Benny Carmella up, and they're all cousins, formed the Royal Order of Can Carriers, the tongue-in-cheek organization, the Jubilee Restaurant up in Reno, Nevada. And it's just a good time Charlie operation. And my company, Sunset, all the companies, Golden Gate, Richmond, all joined the Royal Order of Can Carriers at the time, before it came to CRRC. The Isolas from Las Vegas came on board, Oakland Scavenger, Dewey Vittori, kind of stuff like that. But my company, Sunset, we're above everybody. This is exact words. Benny used to prod me all the time. How come you guys don't join? Now, I'm not president. First thing I did, when I was elected August 27, 1965, I joined the Royal Order of Can Carriers, or the CRRC. We went to the Holiday Inn in Reno. I met Dewey Vittori, I mean, a legendary garbage man out there that told me how to buy a garbage company. And from there on, we became friends and associates. And it's been a great asset. It started off as more like a fraternal organization than a lobbying effort.
They recognized that the Southern District was aggressive and that we better start talking to each other. They decided to just hold meetings, lunches. And we started to meet that way. The San Jose people, like Paul, he was very active in keeping the minutes. And he knew other garbage men around him and tell them about it, so they'd come to it. Pretty soon it grew.
Garbage men in the old days didn't even talk to one another. Scared to death of losing their routes or their franchises and things like that, including myself.
In the older days, or when they were competitive, there were some old animosities in that amongst people, but as I saw that for the greater good, it was better to be collective.
We didn't talk to anybody in South San Francisco. Those guys come over here and sniff over the border. We didn't talk to the guys in San Mateo Scavenger. We didn't talk to the guys in San Jose Scavenger. We didn't talk to anybody. And when I joined the organization, all of a sudden we start meeting people and find out they're really fine, professional, likable people to be with. And then all of a sudden we're communicating with each other, but you didn't cross a line.
Then in 1960, we were successful in having a meeting in Fresno, California, attended by, I remember Dewey Vittori was there, and there were a couple of others from Northern California, possibly Paul Mattson, maybe John Spino, I'm not sure, and several from Southern California. And we held a meeting in Fresno to talk about the need for a state trade association. And that was the first time that we had representatives from North and South actually meet. It was a good meeting, and everyone thought that this is a good beginning, and so forth and so on. Then nothing took place until 1962, where we had a meeting in Santa Barbara.
We got this invitation to go to Santa Barbara. Five of us, I think, went down, and the Los Altos Garbage Company was represented, Palo Alto Sanitation Company, San Jose Garden City Disposal, South San Francisco, I think, and Gilroy. But at any rate, it was a formal opening and gathering of a meeting and a Pledge of Allegiance. And I think Harry Astor opened it with sort of a rounding view of what this is all about. And he says, we must improve the image of the garbage man if we are going to survive and do anything important, and so on and so on. And then afterwards, they had a hospitality hour and, you know, an informal gathering and so forth. And there was some things that went on there that caused me to wonder, how do you convince somebody your image should be better? I mean, just what's the trick to that? And what would this organization do? And then is it done through legislation, or what is it? You know, so, and I don't think anyone really had a handle on it.
And we had a great meeting in Santa Barbara because there were representatives from North and South. And it was a good social time. People got to know each other. And that then resulted, a little over a year later, in 1963, where not only Dewey Vittori, Paul Mattson, John Spino, Andy Anagoni, but others, specifically the San Francisco companies, Golden Gate Disposal, Sunset Scavenger, they attended the meeting. My recollection is it was in Palo Alto at a place called Ricky's. And there was a full turnout. There must have been 30 or 40 or more representative companies from Northern California, and even a lesser number, but still 20 or 30 from Southern California. And that 1963 meeting really set the pace, and there were informal resolutions adopted as to what we needed to do and so forth and so on. That then resulted in other meetings, which finally resulted in there being formed a corporation, which eventually became to be called California Refuse Removal Council. And it was composed of 2 districts and special bylaws for each district to accommodate their respective needs. And that was 1964, and from that time to this day, it's been a strong going organization. The essence of why CRRC really became very successful is when both districts bought into the idea that united we stand, divided we fall. In the early days, after the 1964 incorporation, for a period of time, I was the one in Sacramento that would get up with the authority of the of the Northern District as well, say, I represent the state industry. The Northern District wasn't very happy with that. They wanted to be sure that they had their own representation. This resulted in their hiring a former member of the old water board, Ralph McGill, a wonderful human being. And for the first year or two, Ralph and I would have fun. By that I mean we'd get up and engage in a kind of a jousting match, and sometimes even a shouting match as to what we ought to do. As time went on, my respect for him grew, and vice versa. And Ralph McGill, at one point, caused the Northern District to hire Dick Turner to represent their legal needs. So whenever we got together, we had legal expertise from both halves of California. And Dick Turner turned out to be, and he is, just a great lawyer, very independent thinker.
Ralph McGill got introduced to the industry by Golden Gate Disposal, believe it or not, because see, in the old days, to go for a rate increase, we had to go to the voters. The voters had to approve a rate increase, garbage rate increase, which is ridiculous. So in the mid-50s, the company decided that it was time to change it and to make it, you know, you bring your books, if you deserve it, they give it to you. And we had one election, we lost it. So they hired Ralph McGill to help him with the election. And we won. And he got known by the industry, and that's when CRRC came about. They hired him as the executive director.
McGill and Turner, working with myself and Hy Weissman, formed a team, and while there were differences, our team was able to work together when it really counted and present a united front. And when we did that, we were successful legislatively. When we didn't work together, Northern District couldn't get things through any more than Southern District could. Fortunately, in recent years, there have been statewide meetings. There was a time when each went his own way.
Guys like Harry Ashton that you talk with, he was a very, he's quite a guy. Really impressed with him and his son, by the way. Later, his son. But that brought about a more of a get-along feeling with everybody, and understanding that we had better band together and get in there and be able to compete with other people, and but also learn more about where the government was coming from.
Well, it was originally called the California Refuse Council, and there was a newspaper, Refuse Removal Journal or something like that. And so we thought, well, let's be consistent with the way it's described. So then it went from waste removal or refuse removal to California Refuse Removal Council. I personally have a high regard for the people in the Northern District. I still do. I count many of them who are still living, of course, as friends of mine, and the leadership that was asserted beginning in 1963 and the incorporation, particularly with Oakland Scavenger, the San Francisco companies, and then those other companies that were in the periphery at that time, the peninsula and Northern California, all family-run operations for the most part. They all participated, and working together has made it the success it is today.
And believe me, back then, if you didn't play Pedro and you didn't know how to play liar's dice and you weren't a part of the organization.
The word got around that we have an association, They kept having meetings, and I being the youngest one of the bunch, they'd send me all the time. Go to the meeting. Come back and tell us what's going on. And so I went, and eventually I got involved, right from the start. We didn't skirt it at all. We said it's a responsibility to get together so that we can protect ourselves as an industry.
John Moscone mentioned that there's an association called CRRC, and he explained a little bit, what it was about. And I got up, I said, that's a bunch of baloney. You don't need an association. And I got up, but then he sent me to some of the meetings. And I went from against 100% in favor, and I really saw what CRC was and is about.
Business was going pretty good, so I could steal a little time to go. My father always said, "What the hell are you going to those meetings for?" But it was really an education and networking, and really helped me get a grasp on the industry and a business plan.
Yeah, and it was about the time that CRRC was kind of getting its feet on the ground, trying to determine what direction they were going to go. I was very fortunate that I was taken to the first meetings of the CRRC at New Lucky's restaurant down on 22nd and Telegraph in Oakland with Louis Giovanini.
The representative was Joe Segali at the time. I think my dad suggested that I go to a meeting with Joe. Joe was getting older, driving was difficult. So I drove him to a meeting at Francesco's in Oakland. That was my first experience. And quickly after that, Joe gave over the responsibility of being the representative to me, and I was the alternate for a while. And just sort of snowballed from there. And I consider myself very, very, very lucky that I was able to be the company's representative. It's been a gift for me to be able to learn from all of those guys with all of their minds, their great experience, and all of the effort they've put into making this industry what it is today.
My daughter actually was Trish's assistant for several years. The timing was when I got my first roll-off truck. She had actually just started working for the CRRC, working for Trish. And she came home one day and told me that she'd got this new job, and I asked her what it was, and she told me. And I was interested in it, and she brought me home an application, and I said, well, that's the same thing that we're trying to do.
I was on a
flight to Southern California, and sitting next to me was an older gentleman that we just started talking about what each other did, and he happened to be in solid waste in the Sacramento area, and I was down here relatively new in the Sacramento market. I had been in Napa but starting to work on the Sacramento contract, and he said, well, have you ever thought about joining a trade industry association? And I said, well, SWANA, we kind of participate and go to SWANA, the national show. He said, no, about our local California industry. I said, no, I really hadn't heard much about CRRC at the time. And he said, yeah. I started explaining all of the benefits and the members, and I said, I'd be very interested. That gentleman was Andy Anagoni. So Andy, sponsored my participation, and it's been great, very good for our company, good for me, and I think without CRRC it would be a huge gap, in California, of course, at the lobbying level, but just also at the local level on what one another are doing to provide services to their cities and counties.
It really came about when, my uncle passed away and I was, really at the helm by myself. I think it was Dave Acareza that suggested maybe I take a look at CRRC because it's a group of private companies that band together to work together to, form an association where we have a voice. And it also gave me an opportunity to start networking, meeting other people in the industry, and, getting to know their operations, they get to know mine, and we can learn a lot from each other.
Got into legislation which we were never bothered with, except your local city, county. Now you're talking a state. Al Marino becomes their first manager,
In 1980, when I retired from government, I went to work more as a lobbyist for the CRRC, and then I became kind of a pseudo executive director group. Ralph McGill was the executive director of CRRC, a great guy, very knowledgeable, and very helpful to all of us on the state level trying to get things done.
We had a good relationship through Ralph McGill and Hy Weitzman, our lobbyists and directors from North and South. And the old guard was still in the Capitol across the street, and these guys were well entrenched.
There was a lot of opportunity when I was in Sacramento, and I was carrying his briefcase around. Hy had an office up there, and Ralph would drive in from San Francisco. Dick was called in on an as-needed basis. Another excellent lawyer to be able to work around. But with Hy and Dad and Ralph in particular, I'd walk around and saw how it was done. And that was still at a time when some of the old days mentality was evident in the Capitol. We didn't have term limits. And the folks that they had already been lobbying for since 53 maybe, but certainly since 1964 when CRRC was formed, many of those same folks were in office in 83. You didn't have to come in and introduce yourself or provide justification. You went right to the issue, and you could be so much more efficient because those that you were pitching already had an understanding of the industry as it existed then. It was a lot more fun in those days, and we were very, very effective.
The effectiveness of CRRC from the old days, as you've heard already from Kelly Astor as a young man with Harry Astor, his dad, what kind of focus they had in the Capitol. It's changed as Kelly saw the transition, and as he saw it transition from the old Hy Weitzman days, Al Marino, Harry, his father, and now Kelly has taken over a big role, and others have taken over from the staffing of CRRC. It's become from almost a fraternal or a social organization to a real organization that is very principled on policy issues and how you change policy.
I think we're really effective in Sacramento. I think in years past we were too. It was a different ball game up there with Ralph McGill Al Marino and a representative from the South and the Astor family. Politics were a little different, but we have our lobbyists there, our regulatory people, and we're a known commodity, and I think the legislature and the regulatory bodies look at us for input as a stakeholder.
There were discussions we had when SB 5 was coming into existence. One of the elements that I specifically, and I take credit for this, is that I wanted in the language that franchises could be renewed or extended with or without competitive bidding. And as luck would have it, it was never removed. It's still the law today, so that as franchises would expire or about to be expired, the collector could go into the city council and get it renewed without competitive bidding. It was up to the city council to make that decision, but they had the right to do it.
The one big thing that came about out of all this, of course, was the franchising. I think here in Placer County, we probably had one of the first franchise garbage pickups in the state. The franchise became important because, I mean, a lot of people argue, well, they gave monopoly to just a few people. You know, they're the only ones that are allowed to pick up garbage. But by the same token, the cost of the trucks that were going to have to be bought, you know, all new, environmentally proper trucking and everything, I mean, they cost a fortune. And if I were an industry member, I sure in hell wouldn't want to expend that kind of money without knowing that I had 10 or 15 years ahead of me to recoup.
During my presidency, we had the big bill, the big issue was SB 450, which would have substantially limited franchising within the state. And we were able to defeat that. And I think that was kind of a turning point. I think the industry found out then that they really had some clout across the street and some influence, and that we were taken seriously. Through the 10 years that we spent in the chairs, I mean, we saw tremendous change in the industry, just the changing in the voting and the way directors, companies are represented on the board, and that continued, and they're still making changes and improvements. It's kind of an ongoing process, but I think the majority of the change came with through it started with Fiore Garbarino, who was president before Jerry, and it kind of went through David Vaccareza's presidency. I think those years saw a tremendous amount of change in the industry.
It was about the time that I got involved that I came into it, and a lot of the young, I call them the young Turks. And you could see those guys starting to come in, and they wanted to take advantage of all these new ideas that are coming out. And some of the old timers were still, you know, they're still there, and they had run their thing for enough time. But so these young guys started coming in and moving in. So I had to kind of encourage them, stick with it, you know. You could see that what these younger guys wanted to see happen was really necessary. It was vital to get going.
We had a system very much the same as they do in the Southern District now, where you have county associations. Each company belongs to the county association, but only the president of the association could attend the CRRC meetings. So it was a very difficult and not very democratic process. But I felt that it was necessary for representation, that we have some say in what was going on politically, you know, with changes in Sacramento, the waste board coming on, and the industry changing. Again, that you couldn't just take care of your own little district and not have things affect you from the outside. And about that time, we made a change. By we, I mean collectively, the people, and allowed the general membership to participate, and it democratized and got a greater participation in CRRC.
In the early days of CRRC, in the North anyway, the companies within a county, the independent companies and members within a county would choose one representative to sit on the board of directors.
I remember on the peninsula here, we had the Claremontail Garbagemen's Association, and I remember going to some of those at a young age, 16, 17, 18. In those days, you remember the association, and the association would have dedicated one person that would attend the state CRRC meetings. And the Young Turks was trying to change that so we'd have more representation.
We were a member of CRRC, and we were a member of the Claremontail Garbagemen's Association. I'd go to the Garbagemen's Association meetings, and it was more of a knife and a fork kind of meeting. We'd go there, see some of the other independent garbagemen, but there wasn't a lot, but they mentioned CRRC.
See, there was a time the CRC was in trouble. We started acquiring companies, and it so happened that we acquired companies in different counties, and we were the only company in that county. So each county had a vote. So we held 4, 5, or 6 votes, while other companies held 1 vote. Some companies didn't hold any votes because there was only 1 vote per county. So when I was president, Paul Geisler and I, we convinced the board of directors of CRC and me. I had to convince my board because they were against it because we lost a lot of power in CRC, which was okay. We had plenty of power even after that. To go along and change the bylaws to go from county to company. Each company had a vote.
Neil Beck, at the time, he was promoting that Northern District should be 1 vote, 1 company. And he kept saying, just keep coming to the meetings. Come to the meetings and see. We'll effectively make a change. And you had what was known as the Young Turks, Jerry Stokes and Paul Geisler and Dave Vaccarez and all this, and they effectively wanted change.
When we came in, we were still under the old system. After he and I got on the executive committee or became officers, that is when we started to initiated changes. Kind of started well, it's the system we have today. 1 company, 1 vote. And it was Jerry and I and David Vaccareza that kind of pushed that through. And
it was a little hard. It was a little hard sometimes to get to do that.
Al Rossi, that's when Al Rossi started calling us the Young Turks because we were disturbing things within the ranks of the association. And even then, with the changes, we had an awful lot of support from the rank and file, and even some of the older companies and so forth. It was time for change. We just happened to be the ones to do it at that point.
There were quite a few that saw this transition and stuck with it. I mean, like I say, it was we opened an office in Sacramento, something that we never had before, and it made us a recognizable force in not only in California but in the United States, and it was exciting to be involved at that time.
It was during Jerry's presidency that we opened the Sacramento office. Prior to that, he mentioned Ralph McGill. He was our executive director, but I don't know if it was even a full-time, he was a contract person. He was acted as our director kind of as a semi-lobbyist, although I don't think Ralph was ever registered. It was Hy Weitzman that was the lobbyist.
He wasn't a legal lobbyist. Yeah.
And that was part of the maturing of the association. We had made some changes. We'd gone to 1 company, 1 vote. We've always had our somewhat rocky relationship with the Southern District. Even though we're 1 legal entity, we have different ways of doing things, and we approach things different. And it was Jerry's presidency when we opened the office, and I think it was on the 3rd floor. The first office was on the 3rd floor.
I do remember that.
Ralph McGill retired. We hired a full-time executive director, and that kind of started a new era in the industry.
That's the time we also started the WCRC too.
WCRC. Mike Torrey from the president of the Washington Association, and Jerry, basically, and then there was myself and a couple of guys from Oregon. That was basically the start of WCRC to monitor federal legislation.
In the early days, all you had to do was take care of your own house and not care about what was going on around you. And saw that the changes in the garbage industry was changing. There was more environmental and more regulatory and political intrusion into the industry.
In years gone by, it was just a garbage man in his truck. But with the advent of the 70s and Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act and recycling, the whole industry got more professional with regards to technical and engineering. Back in 1993, federal Subtitle D passed for landfills and phased out a lot of landfills where you had to have clay liners and closure plans and gas collection systems. So at CRRC, they created an engineering position in order to have the technical aspects of the industry in order to work on permits and technology. So CRRC was able to be one of the first lobby and organizations to actually bring in technical expertise in order to guide the future.
And that's when the industry just took off, and we were, how do you say it, the voice at the time to show the legislature, especially because other people have passed laws, that we need this industry to go in this direction with these types of rules and laws. You know, but politics are politics. There's a garbage company in every city in the state of California, and the nation for that matter. And the garbage man, he's got to know somebody politically there. He's got to be able to contact his legislature if he's. And when you get together, you got a voice. You know, everybody knows that. Hey, these guys mean business. They want change. They want things that's going to help the industry, not hurt it. They want to be aware. Want you to be aware that you can't just go by what the unknowing public is screaming. They don't know what they're talking about a lot of times. Sure, they may be right in many respects, and we'll grant them that. But you know, we got to be heard too. And that's what we did. We just wanted to be heard, and by golly, they listened for many years.
It became the spokesperson for the industry, particularly the Northern District. Prior to that, we all had pretty much our own say in our own backyard because networking was very good. All of us participated, and I still do, you know, in our own community with fraternal organizations, service clubs, local politics, and chambers of commerce and whatnot. So that works well locally, but when you deal with the state and the federal level, you need to have a voice. And CRRC was the voice and did an excellent job representing us. We had some good people, very dedicated, and a lot of time that was devoted to them.
I think I'm most proud of this organization because of the way that it's evolved. Coming from, like I say, a more social organization to the political powerhouse that it is today.
To me, CRC is, there's nothing better. I don't know how to explain it, but CRC, that's the industry. That's the independence industry, okay?
Well, I think it brought it to the attention of the politicians, you know, up there that it's a big industry. And since the politicians are making so many new laws, we have to have somebody up there to either defend us or approve those, you know, and explain to the politicians, you know, what's good and what's bad, you know. Like I said, if they had to depend on us going up there and arguing with the politicians, for one thing, I don't think I'd be that good. For a second, I don't think they would even listen to me. So, no, I'm glad I belong to the organization, and it does a lot of good.
We don't have the time. Our time is to figure out how we're going to pull more cardboard or whatever. But as far as the Sacramento, you guys doing all the, and keep us posted.
I think being one person speaking out in a small county like Napa is almost meaningless in state issues, but jointly we have the opportunity to have some representation at the state level, and I think that's extremely important.
Well, I think CRRC still stands for the smaller company, and I think they pull the smaller companies together, you know, so we have a voice, and I think that's very important. I think CRRC is great.
To have our own voice, you know, I think is huge. I think CRRC has been very instrumental in some of the positive changes that we've seen in the course of how the state here in California runs their waste industry.
Clean air, you know, natural gas vehicles. There's always something going on, and I think CRRC plays a vital role in looking out for the interests of the industry to make us as environmentally friendly as possible while still allowing the companies to be profitable. Very valuable association.
Since I've been part of CRRC, you know, a lot of the clean air initiatives and the work that's being done there that normally would have just been passed through at the state, and a company would have to take those. CRRC's done a great job on our behalf to step up and make sure that they understand the reality and the impacts of what happens in the industry.
Our main thing is to belong to the CRRC because they're really our spokespeople. They've got great staffs that they work with, and we keep abreast of all the new laws that are pending, coming up before us, that we support or disapprove of, and they're our sounding board, and we need them badly.
The organizations that we have belonged to, none of them have been hands-on like CRRC is, very much in tune with what's going on a weekly and a monthly basis. So when something comes out, we don't hear about it 3 months after it's too late. We hear about it before it's too late and have an opportunity to weigh in and make an opinion. So we're very fortunate to have that great staff and great membership.
You know, it's an active, very effective group, and it's fun to be a part of it. It expands my participation in the business and the industry a huge amount.
That's what keeps me around, are the people in this industry, and that's the most valuable and most rewarding part of my relationship with CRRC.
I think that the CRRC is the one constant in this whole industry. As you have changes, the group that is there that can convey what the history was, but yet transition it to going forward, seems to be the CRRC. You know, you have members show up at CRRC, whether it's especially the old timers event. You have members showing up, and those are the guys that were there doing it 50, 60, 70 years ago. And then they're communicating with the younger generation who are now going to take it to the next step. And where do they do that? They do that at the CRRC. And especially with the changes and the mandates going on, you've got to have somebody who's looking after your interests. The camaraderie, it's so important because you've got so much on the line here. You've got so many people who've put their heart and soul into this whole thing that the CRRC is also a venue for them to get together and meet the families and to talk about next generation sorts of issues.
Sharing ideas. A big part of it. Hearing what other people are doing, you know. Sure, people still have confidential things in their companies, but they do share a lot more with one another through CRRC today.
Because, you know, this organization wasn't so much about what to do, it was what not to do, because they didn't want you to make the same mistake they might have made, and it cost you. So they had friends, and they were trying to teach. So really they were trying to teach other companies and other friends, and it was about train the trainers. And along the way I've just been blessed to be involved and having fun all the time.
One thing that's nice, you share a lot of ideals with other guys that are in the business, and that's what I really enjoy, hearing how they do stuff and you know, how we do stuff. And a lot of times it's not just apples, you know, what works good over there might not work good here, but you share a lot of ideals.
We've all learned belonging to CRRC has certainly helped unite a lot of us independent operators in the philosophies that we've had, you know, and continue. So
I think that we've put together, as so-called managers, let's say, of the Trade Association, a phenomenal staff, so that our respect in the industry in Sacramento has just naturally fallen from that our effort pulling together that staff and just trying to do what is right, you know, just going after the pieces and parts of legislation that will actually sustain the efforts that we've put together for solid waste management and preservation of landfill space and preservation of the environment.
One of the most important things is that we have to have an image to our elected people. State legislation is extremely important because of how it affects our industry. There's a terrific amount of legislation that has occurred in recycling, all the issues of solid waste, all the environmental issues, and it's going to continue happening, and we have to have a voice up in Sacramento.
Regulations, regulation.
But on the national level, there was an effort to bring the industry under public utility control. There was an effort by Lockyer here in California to do that, and it was kind of spreading nationwide. We're all regulated, so that's not an issue. It's just that we prefer to have local representations and regulation rather than larger. So Dick Turner, who was our legal counsel at the time, and I went back to Washington, D.C., pleaded our case with a national group. Kind of mixed emotions because some on the national thought PUC might be nice and some didn't. So kind of on our own, representing the state of California and CRRC, Dick and I went to visit with Ed Meese, who was then Attorney General under Ronald Reagan's term. Got admission to the White House, had a nice conference with him, and got a lot of support. It just possibly as a small part of that, the PUC did not happen. So that was kind of nice. We got a nice private tour of the White House, and got to drink beer out on the steps and whatnot. So.
I think the rules and regulations over the last decade has just gone crazy, and it's more paperwork now, and you have to add more people, computers, and everything has to be reported now, and the industry is really changing. They're trying to recycle practically everything, and it's getting harder and harder for us as an industry. But keeping abreast with the laws and CRRC, I think, does a pretty good job in having people in Sacramento.
I would hate to think what garbage regulations and recycling regulations would be without CRRC. CRRC brought a message of the small private. Irregardless how big your company was, you were still a small private. Brought that taste to Sacramento.
Well, I think with their proactive stance legislatively and especially on a local level here, we seem to hold some influence when it comes to trying to get certain pieces of legislation passed or voice our opinion on certain items that we speak about in the meetings all the time.
I think it's great. It's a great organization that we're to have because of the fact that there's a lot of laws since the time that I've been involved here that have came down the pike, and having a strong organization up front and being proactive with the legislators and doing things is the best.
The work that they do at the state level has probably helped influence the industry, and keep some of the environmental stuff in check. Some of it obviously is good and that we need, but some of it sometimes seems it's a little bit overboard or overly burdensome on some of the haulers. Sometimes they get the cart before the horse. So I think CRRC has helped a lot to make sure that we keep the horse in front of the cart.
It's also done some good things in watching out for the haulers with regard to recycling and, our permitting processes at the counties and the state level for our transfer facilities and the likes. But I think that that's really the nucleus of why CRC was formed.
At the same time, the garbage companies have to be able to deal with the regulatory side in the right way. And I think a lot of the members of CRC do an incredible job of doing that, the way that they compost, the way that they're select about what goes into their, what goes into their factories, okay, whether it's going into a MRF, how do they tailor a collection program to maximize what goes into a MRF? How do they collect yard waste and grind it and do those things so that when it goes to a composting operation, it doesn't contaminate the entirety of that. And I think that while some people take that burden very seriously and they do the best job they can to make sure things are right, I think others just look at collecting stuff as quickly as they can, dumping it somewhere, and then going on to the next day. That's a huge difference in the way that companies do business.
That I'm unsure if the law fully changed, but it said that compost operations fell into the same classification as a landfill. And we were doing composting here then, and we were required to get a permit by the state. As soon as we applied to the state for a permit to operate the compost operation, we had opposition from all our neighbors. and I truly can say that with the help of CRRC, with the help of legislative activity on that side, we were able to bring about and change some of the regulations governing compost operations. I can say that's probably one of the biggest things, or we could have been closed down.
CRRC, I think, really made its bones, so to speak, when it built itself up to meet all the AB 939, the new legislation, and how the companies came together and were able to put all their facilities in place, all the MRFs and all the routes for handling all the new recycling requirements.
Well, CRRC has maintained a voice and presence at the waste board on a technical and a political level, whereby we're able to streamline permitting for recycling facilities and compost facilities and MRFs. We've been able to push an envelope and be ever present with regards to new opportunities of market development, organic diversion, and composting. So CRRC has been the folks that are part of the AB 939 structure, who developed the AB 939 structure of composting and MRFs, and will do everything to protect it.
Great concept, 939, when it came out. There are a lot of things that impact 939 and that 50%. The CRC's been there every step of the way. Bottle bill, Department of Conservation, those things that the state, had wanted to do and did do successfully were part of CRC's participation, which allow, companies like ourselves to be successful and not just, go out and recycle and not be sure where we're going to end up, where's the end of the road. So CRC's been, instrumental in looking into the future, seeing where these initiatives are going to go, and if they're going to be good for the industry or if they're going to be bad for the industry, and take a position on those. And I think that as much as we all compete with one another, members of CRRC, in a way we're really collective and have a lot of the same ideas and want to go the same places, and without CRRC it wouldn't be possible.
Both Ralph McGill and Dick Turner were instrumental in convincing the Northern District many times when there were differences of opinion that we would reconcile those differences and present a united front. When we did that, that's how we got our famous bill involving the California Integrated Waste Management Board. I thought that the industry was important enough that we ought to have whatever regulatory agency was going to be put into place, that it be composed of issues
addressing solid waste management. Plus, we should have representatives of the private sector on that board so that when policy was discussed, that there would be someone knowledgeable about the industry that could evaluate with the other non-industry members what the proper course of action was. And after a lot of back and forth and so forth and so on, the consensus of opinion was that Governor Reagan, Republican, did not want to expand government. They all said there's not a chance that Reagan would support an independent board. And very frankly, I was the guy that kept pushing. At the time, George Deukmejian was a senator. He worked behind the scenes, arranged a meeting that I attended with Deukmejian, then Governor Reagan, and for a few minutes Ed Meese, who was the chief of staff. We discussed it, and obviously Deukmejian had acquainted the governor with what the issues were. And Reagan said, well, what you've heard, Harry, he said, is correct. I don't want to expand government. But with a kind of a tilt, with his Irish smile, tilt of his head, he says, there are exceptions, aren't there? SB 5 was what created the Waste Management Board in 1972. And it had 2 representatives, one from Northern California and one from Southern California.
Thanks to the efforts of Harry Astor and the CRRC, the board was formed, and I became the executive officer of that board. And that's where I got familiar with the industry and all the members thereof. And we started from scratch almost, trying to bring some sanity to what was happening with garbage throughout the state. Actually, thanks to the CRRC and a few engineers who had specialized in the waste disposal problems, waste management problems, and some of the recyclers that were starting to get more organized, thanks to them, the answers that we needed as far as the state was concerned in starting to set up legislation, rules and regulations, their help really put the thing on the map. Without them, I don't think we would have ever succeeded, because the board had very few people. I had 2 industry members, John Moscone and the guy from Southern California, Jacob Shavanian. But thanks to them, when we started formulating regulations, we would have gone overboard on a lot because, as I say, nobody really had any knowledge of the industry, what was going on and all. And some of the regulations we talked about probably would have put everybody out of business.
With the 1970s and the Waste Board and what they were starting out, we were fortunate enough to, in the early days with the Waste Board, is to have good liaison and connections with them, genuine connections, because of the mutual interest. Of course, John Moscone was on the board, Jake Sabanian, they knew the industry, but some like Phil Bertro, they were kind of new to it. So it gave us an opportunity to kind of present our case. This is what the industry does, this is what it's all about. And used to take some of the staff members on different tours. Sometimes we'd fly around the county and look at different landfills, and then sometimes we'd drive through the areas and talk about what real collection was all about. You know, how does it work? This is a garbage truck, and this is a landfill, and this is what we're doing, this is what we're all about.
After the board came into existence in 1972, there were subsequent events. Every session, there was some kind of movement or bill to suggest doing away with the board and making it a department. And governors would prefer the department because they have total control. We don't want the governor to have total control. We want the private sector there. So it's been a fight ever since 1972 up to the present. Everybody wants to make it a department. And one of the major things that we've accomplished is that we still have a spokesman from the private sector on the Waste Management Board.
Governor Brown, I can't remember the year, but he appointed a guy by the name of Tom Quinn as the environmental director for the state. And under him, he wanted to do away with the board and have made a department. And the industry opposed that very much because they didn't want to deal with a department head who had very little knowledge probably of anything, and they wanted to see the board kept whole. So some of the board, I can't remember who they were, Moscone and Vaccarezza, he was the president from Lodi, Lenny Stefanelli, Leo Conti from Golden Gate Disposal. They came in, we had a big meeting, and they fought like hell to keep the board. And thanks to them, the board, as it is now, came about.
During Duke Majan's term, his chief of staff, Mike Frost, created a position for himself. He suggested that it be a full-time board, reduce it from 9 to 6, and only have one industry representative. I fought that, but I was unsuccessful.
The laws that were passed when they set up the board, they started this business where the counties had to submit a plan for their solid waste management. If they didn't submit the plan, there was no money involved, there was no penalty. So we had to work like hell to try and get the counties to come in with a plan. And again, thanks to the CRRC, who were of course under franchise or under permit by each county to pick up their garbage, they helped a great deal in getting the county plans done and submitted. And so we got those all approved throughout the state. And that was the beginning, really, of some semblance and sanity to the whole solid waste management field.
And CRRC asked me if I would consider putting my name forward for the industry seat on the Integrated Waste Management Board. CRRC really pushed, and we went through the process, and there were 4 of us that got down to the final cut, and at the end of the day, Governor Wilson's staff asked me if I would take the position. And during that time, we were growing. There was a lot of things going on. AB 939 became the law. I used to tell people that I had, 38 managers at that time when AB 939 came down the road. And I couldn't convince, I had half of them felt one way, half of them felt the other way. And when people asked me to go on the waste board, the question was, how are you going to deal with these type, certain issues? And I said, look, I had 38 managers. I couldn't get them to agree. Do you think I'm going to get an entire industry to agree? I'm not. So I said, I'm not going to be your lobbyist, but what I will be is somebody that understands this industry and will do everything in its power to, represent it adequately. And there's going to be times we're not going to agree. It's just going to happen. But I'm going to try to stay consistent. And I felt that if I could keep the tables level and not give anybody an advantage because of something that we did, then the smartest people or the most dedicated people would win. And that's the way it should be. And I felt good about my 7 years on the board doing that. I was lucky enough, especially when I sat on the board, that a lot of regulatory packages were being debated. Okay, transfer station regulations, composting regulations, AB 939. So in 95, all jurisdictions were supposed to be at 25%. In 1997, the board, the second meeting I was at, the waste board was getting ready to send the 5th letter to jurisdictions asking them to turn in their numbers from 1995. And I was pretty amazed that they hadn't done anything to these people that were pretty recalcitrant, didn't want to be part of this process or live up to the law. But I looked at it from the standpoint that we as an industry had invested millions and millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, to do the operations of that law. Okay, to build material recovery facilities, to buy the equipment, to go from little tubs to fully automated systems. We were doing all the things that it took to let jurisdictions meet AB 939. And to have a government agency that was responsible for that still be fiddling around with notifying people. And the list was, there's 536 jurisdictions in the state, and of those, it was like 200 or 300 that hadn't even sent in their numbers. I said, I think we need to set a date for when the first hearings will be to enforce the law. And what we did is we put a date in, and that was the first time that the Waste Board had ever made a drop-dead date for AB 939. And as a result of that, I think we got almost all of the numbers and all of the reports into the board by the time, although we had about 10 or 12 that didn't. So we had hearings, and 6 of them, or 7 of them, we ended up putting them on a compliance order and fining them for not living up to the law. And I think what that did was it let everybody know, citizens, local governments, and the industry, that in fact that waste board would enforce AB 939. I think that was critical.
The local paper mentioned that I was, Young Man of the Year of the Vallejo Chamber of Commerce, was elected president of the State Water Association. One of my first duties was to lead a group of 30, the other 2 guys are TV guys, 30 guys, waste management industry leaders, on a 3-week tour of the Soviet Union, Sweden, Denmark, Yugoslavia, and possibly other nations. We ended up at Italy. We wanted to eat some good food and drink some good wine. But the Russian trip, although it happened during my time, it was spearheaded by Stefanelli and whoever he had with him, and I was appreciative to go along with it.
We did do all these trips. We did a wonderful, PR, met people. We met and built up a relationship with all the garbage that went on this trip. A lot of them have passed away now, but it just built up we brought our politicians along with us, and they got a better insight to some of the problems. We came back to the city, so we've got the best collection system in the world.
Come to find out that they were 10 to 15 years behind us, and they were so antiquated we couldn't believe. Even their garbage compaction trucks they looked like they designed them backwards, and we didn't want to say anything. And I'll never forget the day that we got off the plane and we got into customs and they closed that door behind us. You knew the umbilical cord to the United States was severed. And when they said, you're here for 7 days, you're here for 7 days. We thought, can we leave early? The second day we want to leave early. We don't even want to go to Moscow. Let's go. They wouldn't let us. You're there for 7 days, you're programmed, that's it. God, and our guide, come to find out, was KGB. It was really amazing. Trash Patch got started because we wanted the legislature to be aware that there was a representative group that represented the solid waste management industry, the private sector. Once we got SB 5 through 1972, then the need became obvious. We had the board, and invite the people, invite the staff people, become known.
In 2007, we're celebrating the 29th annual Trash Bash. My understanding is the event has come a long way from its meager beginnings when it was just more of an informal cocktail party to what it is today, attended by a couple of hundred or more staff members, legislators, representatives from the governor's office. They have had governors in the past attend, members of the waste board and their staff. It's one of the highest ranked political receptions in Sacramento. It is something that is looked forward to, I know, by many of the staffers at the Capitol. And it really is a social gathering, but it is an opportunity for our members to show their legislators the strength of our association in the Capitol, and also their local officials. Many will invite their city council members, county supervisors, to also come and show the strength of the local affiliation here at the Capitol. It's really our grassroots lobbying effort. It was in the year 2000, 7 years ago now, that Patty Garbarino was on the board, and she suggested that CRRC should consider honoring the past presidents and give the current and future leadership an opportunity to learn from them as well. So during her tenure, the Past Presidents event was founded. And during that time, members of both northern and southern districts come together, typically in the San Francisco Bay Area, and have a chance to break bread together and talk about the challenges of the past and to learn from each other and contemplate the future of the industry. They get an opportunity to share the old times, the good times, the struggles in the industry and in CRRC. But mostly it's a chance to reconnect, or to bridge, if you will, the past, the present, and the future. I don't know how long the Old Timers event has been around, when it was started. I'm not aware. I've been here 10 years, and it was already a valued tradition of CRRC. And primarily it is an opportunity for those that have retired from the industry to reconnect with old friends. We always do a gift for the old timers, and those gifts are sponsored by our industry and associate members. And it really is more of a social get-together, but I can tell you for some of those members, it's the only time during the course of a year that they get a chance to see each other and really reminisce about their life in the industry. And from my perspective, watching them, you really understand how important the industry was to each and every person, the relationships that they created that are lifelong relationships, not just somebody that you worked with or you worked for, but that you shared your lives together, and how they continue to do that into the future. The Truck and Mechanic Safety Rodeo was started some 15 to 20 years ago as a CRRC function, and its primary goal is as a safety-related and family event, highly attended by the owners, their families, their employees, and their families. The spirit of the event is to promote safety and professionalism out on the road. We have the California Highway Patrol involved, all of the community service departments, the fire department, DARE for the children, and of course a lot of fun and games. I think it's as evidenced by what you see in the eyes of the children and all of the participants there, that it's a good time is really had by all. Actually, the carnival is really well attended, not just by the children, but by their families as well. I think everyone enjoys the cotton candy and the snow cones, and the kids have a great time in the bounce house, and we always have some live entertainment. One of the highlights of the day is after everyone's had a wonderful barbecue lunch, the awarding of the trophies and the prizes. There is a champion in each of the events, and the champion is awarded a personalized leather jacket with the rodeo logo on it, and those are highly coveted and provide many bragging rights. It's customary that the children start lining up well in advance of us getting ready to start the children's raffle. We make sure at the children's raffle that everybody walks away with a prize, and we always make sure we have these small garbage cans filled with candy, and we try to purchase as many gifts for the kids as we can, and all of that comes from sponsor dollars. This entire event is paid for by the generosity of our members, both industry and associate alike. Our annual convention is typically held in March or April of each year, and in the past it was primarily in California. When the Northern District hosted it, it would be somewhere in Northern California, and then likewise when Southern California hosted, it would be in Southern California. So you'd get an opportunity to see different areas of the state, and it was about 8 years ago now that when Louis Pellegrini was going through his first term as president, that he suggested that we go off-site, that we go out of state, and the first convention in Hawaii was held. And since then, the Southern District has also branched out, and we've been to Las Vegas and most recently Scottsdale, Arizona. And for the first time next year, we'll be going to Cabo San Lucas for our first international convention. And they've selected Hawaii 2009. The convention always includes a 2-day golf tournament. A welcome reception is always hosted, and it's a chance for everyone to meet and greet their friends in the industry. And many family members attend. Many bring their children. They'll make a vacation out of it. The convention coincides with the annual meeting of the members and is our official meeting for the year. The gavel passes between state presidents from the northern and southern districts. The event always concludes with the President's Gala Banquet, which is a celebration of the outgoing president and the incoming president.
I happened to be the figurehead because I was singing, I was going to every one of their meetings, and you know, they're the type of people say, okay, tell Andy, he'll do it, you know. Which I did.
I went right up through the chairs, and in fact, I was the youngest president they ever put in. And one of the accomplishments that were achieved during my term was the signing of SB 5, which is the Bible of the industry, what was necessary during those times. And not that I did anything special than anyone else, it just happened to fall, really.
CRRC, for me, have been involved in it basically since the inception, and it's still running strong. I did my presidency, I put the 10 years in, and stepped back to let other people be involved, and so I think it has its place. It's done a lot for the individual companies.
As a past president of the CRRC, I really truly believed I was representing the industry as a whole. That's what I'm proud about.
I was president of my own company, and then when I went through the chairs of the CRRC, 1982-83, I became the president of the CRRC itself. Yeah.
So I went through all the chairs twice, as a matter of fact. We went through, Silvio Garavanta nominated me to go through the chairs. I think the first step was treasurer. And I always appreciated Silvio for doing that, because it came right out of the box and gave me an opportunity at a very early age, perhaps too early, because we were growing at such a pace, and the demands on our time was such that it was difficult. So anyway, we did that for a few years, and it finally became too much, and the demands of Empire's growth were too much. So I kind of dropped out, and Bill Bozzigalupi moved into my slot, and so he moved up through the chairs. And then as things quieted down, I got a second breath and got re-involved with the association, went through the whole routine of the chairs again. And it was an exciting time, because during that period, this California Solid Waste Management Board was created. The AB 939 was real hot and heavy. And we had an opportunity to really get involved and participate in that.
I went through the chairs and became president of the CRRC. And now I'm a member, wait a minute, director emeritus of CRRC. Okay. So it means I'm old.
Both of us went through the chairs and had every position. Well, we had a lot of fun. That's just going through the chairs is probably one of the highlights of my life.
Even though a lot of things happened during our presidencies and during our terms on the board, it certainly wasn't. It was a joint effort. I mean, we had good, active members. The officers were active. So I mean, it was just a matter of putting things together, and it was a joint effort.
Well, actually, my father was one of the original founders of CRRC, and he was the president of CRRC in 1969. And I just kind of grew up going to meetings as a kid. As a result, I started going to the CRRC meetings as I got older and participating in the discussions. And it was just a fun thing that I looked forward to every month, to get together with people who really had a lot of the same things in common that I did. And it just inspired me to be part of it. And then in I want to say about 1992, I was president of the association as well. And so, you know, as a father-son, I guess I was the first father and son, you know, president that it came to be.
Remember, Fiore Garbarino was president at the time, or incoming president, and he asked me if I wanted to go through the chairs, and I thought that was a real honor. And from there, I'm now on my second term as president, which is the first to be recycled through the chairs. CRRC has been a great venue to learn and share and represent the industry through.
Becoming president of CRRC, and it was the 2 years I was the president. It was most memorable in that I met so many people and just had such a good time with it, you know. And I owe a lot to that because it was about a year and a half after Trish came to our organization, and I really couldn't have done it without her, you know.
Jerry Stokes from Modesto Disposal, and I believe that it was he was the president at the time, and it was on the committee were Paul Geisler and Mario Aquilino, and I remember walking into the room there at the meeting and just being completely overwhelmed by that. And I've been very lucky. When people ask if I feel any different than the guys at the table, I don't. And I even remember somebody telling me, a woman friend, you know when you've been accepted into a group, especially that perhaps is male dominated, when they swear in front of you, and this group certainly does do that. And I join in with them.
10 years or so ago, so I've been at 1997, Dave Acalreza asked me to be on the board of the CRRC. And that was something you know, I'll never forget, because being on the board of the CRRC allowed me to meet just I don't know how many people. 80% of the people that I know, 90% of the people I know now and interact with, both from the Northern District and the Southern District, are because of my involvement in CRRC.
One day, Louis Pellegrini called me up and asked me if I would like to come on the executive board. I told him, well, right now I'm kind of busy, let me think about it, and let me talk to my wife, and looked at it and said, yeah. You know, I called him back, told him, yeah, I would. You know, it took 10 years to go through those chairs. Enjoyed pretty much every minute of it. You know, we travel a lot. It's good meetings, a lot of good people. Take the gavel and you run the meeting, and probably the hardest thing is trying to keep that group in order. I mean, they're all so passionate and you know, and love the industry and have their views. My presidency was 2004, 2005, so I've just become an old timer.
I'm very optimistic about the CRRC's future. What I have seen occur in the last 10, 15 years really has me astounded. It's all about what the individual members struggle with on a daily basis operationally. That always leads us into legislative initiatives, either opposing or supporting change in the law. And I think because they have this new sophistication level and they have the kind of assistance that is available to them, I think they're very well positioned and poised to successfully meet the new challenges they'll confront. There's no telling what those will be, but we have a hint based on what we've seen occur in the last decade. Recycling infrastructure that this industry developed is now being looked at from an air quality standpoint, from an environmental justice standpoint. So there's a lot of regulatory oversight in terms of how they do what they do, and they're going to continue to need to be visible with their elected officials and their regulators to ensure that their voice is heard as those regulations take shape.
The future is starting to unfold now into a new paradigm of solid waste and recycling. And I think what CRRC is doing actively in the Capitol every day is to form that future.
there's no limit. Our current president, Louis Pellegrini, and his successors, I mean, we've got a tremendous board. There's just a wealth of enthusiasm and talent and knowledge. I see nothing but success for this organization, and you've got the best people that are going to carry on the tradition and the values of this industry for many, many years to come.
Garbage man, good with a can. I've got a truck, so what the heck do you do with your garbage if you don't have a garbage man? Do with your garbage if you don't have a garbage man or woman. I get up at dawn. Yes, we do early in the morning. Doesn't take long. Till I'm surrounded by all the things you wish were gone. It all stinks, it's all stale, and some of it's obscene.
It smells so mean.
Putrid mounds of forgotten food in every shade of green. Something blue that smells like beer. Meatloaf from another year. Things that no one else has seen, but it's just part of my routine. 'Cause I'm a garbage man.
Yes, I'm a garbage man.
Good with a can. I've got a truck.
Oh yeah, I got a truck.
So what the heck do you do with your garbage if you don't have a garbage man? Do with your garbage if you don't have a garbage man.